I was bagging tomatoes when he walked in. I didn't look up right away. 3 years at Santos supermarket teaches you to read people without really seeing them. Someone in worn sneakers checks every price tag. Someone in a suit grabs one thing and leaves. You stop seeing people and start seeing transactions. But this man didn't fit either category. He walked in like the store rearranged itself for him. 3 other men followed close behind, silent and stiff like soldiers. He wore a dark coat that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. Sharp jaw, heavy brows, dark eyes that swept the room like he was calculating the value of everything in it. Including me. I kept bagging tomatoes. You. His voice landed like a gavel hitting wood. I looked up slowly. Can I help you? He was already at my counter, ignoring the small line forming behind him. He placed a single pack of chewing gum on the belt. Then, without looking away from my face, he reached into his coat and dropped a thick stack of bills on the counter. $1,000. Just sitting there between us like loose change. Keep the change, he said flatly. I looked at the money. Then at him. There was something in his eyes, absolute certainty. The confidence of a man who had never once placed a bet and lost. He expected me to gasp. To grab it. To smile the way everyone smiled for him. I picked up the gum. I scanned it. That'll be $1.20, I said. Something shifted in his face. Did you hear what I said? I did. I held out his change. 80 cents. He didn't take it. He stared at me the way someone stares at a machine that has stopped working mid-task, confused, almost offended. Around us the store had gone quiet. Even his men seemed unsure what to do with this. He slid the stack of bills closer. Take it. I don't want it. A short pause. Then something that was almost amusement crossed his face. You don't want $1,000. Not from you. And why not? Because I earned my wage today already. I don't need tips from strangers. He tilted his head, studying me the way people study something they've decided to own. How much do you earn? Weekly. I said nothing. Monthly then. He looked around the store slowly, at the flickering overhead light, at the faded uniform I wore, at the cracked linoleum beneath my register. Then back at me. The look on his face was not cruel exactly. It was worse. It was dismissive. Whatever it is, it can't be much. Not in a place like this. My salary is none of your business. Everything is my business. He leaned one hand on the counter. I know your type. Proud. Stubborn. Struggling to make ends meet but too stiff-necked to accept help when it's standing right in front of you. That's not help, I said. That's performance. His eyes sharpened. He straightened up, buttoned his coat slowly, and looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes at all. Fine, he said quietly. Let me make you a better offer. He reached back into his coat and pulled out another stack, placing it beside the first. Double. Maybe more. He set it down gently like it was delicate, like it deserved reverence. That, he said, is for one night. Come home with me. You'll make more in those hours than you'll make in this place all year. His eyes moved over me slowly, deliberately, the way you look at something you've already decided to purchase. I think that's more than fair. For someone in your position. The store went completely silent. My hand moved before my brain gave it permission. The slap cracked across his cheek, clean, sharp, loud enough to echo off the shelves. My palm stung. My chest was heaving. I hadn't planned it, and I didn't regret it. His head had turned slightly with the impact. He stayed like that for 1 second. 2. His men reached for their coats. He raised one hand, barely, just a slight lift of 2 fingers, and they stopped. He turned back to face me slowly. There was a faint mark rising on his cheek. His dark eyes were completely, terrifyingly still. Not rage. Something colder than rage. You just made a very serious mistake, he said softly. My voice didn't shake. I made sure of it. You made yours first. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he picked up his gum, left both stacks of money on the counter, and walked out without another word. I pushed the money off the counter into the bin beneath the register. My hands were trembling. I hid them in my apron. The customer behind him stepped forward nervously. Just these, please." "Of course," I said. And I kept working. His name, I found out 2 weeks later when my life began falling apart, was Dante Reyes. The most feared man in the city. And I had slapped him in front of witnesses. 2 weeks later, my landlord called. I'd lived in my apartment for 4 years. Never missed a payment. But the building had been sold to a development company, and my lease was being terminated at the end of the month. He sounded sorry. He also sounded scared. I didn't connect it. Not yet. 3 days after that, I came in for my shift at Santos and found the doors locked. A notice on the glass said the store had been acquired by an investment group and would be closing for restructuring. My manager sent a text apologizing. He didn't have a number to refer me to. I started applying for other jobs. 2 interviews lined up. Both cancelled the morning of, no explanation. I applied for emergency housing assistance. My application got flagged for verification issues and was stuck in a queue. I was sleeping in my car by the 3rd week. I sat in the back seat with my knees pulled up and my jacket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the rain streak down the windows, and I kept turning the pieces over in my mind. The landlord who sold suddenly. The store that restructured. The interviews that vanished. The assistants that stalled. One man. One hand raised. Soldiers standing down. I said his name out loud in the dark. Dante Reyes. He found me on a Tuesday. I was in a library, not because I needed books, but because it was warm and they let you stay for hours without buying anything. I was on a public computer looking for rooms for rent when a shadow fell over the keyboard. I turned around, and there he was. Different coat this time. Same dangerous stillness. He sat down in the chair beside me like we'd planned this, like we were old friends catching up. "You've had a difficult few weeks," he said. I felt my stomach drop. I kept my face steady. "Come to gloat. Came to offer you a solution." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Formal, typed, with signatures already prepared at the bottom. A business arrangement. 1 year. You'll have a home, financial security, and stability. In exchange, you'll legally become Mrs. Reyes. I read it twice. "You want me to marry you," I said flatly. "I want you to agree to a contract. Marriage is just the legal mechanism. You destroyed my life because I slapped you." He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. He just watched me with those dark, calculating eyes. "I dismantled what you had. I'm offering you something better. You're offering me a cage. I'm offering you a choice." He leaned back, perfectly calm, which is more than most people get from me. I looked at the paper. I looked at him. And I thought about my car. About the cold. About how 3 weeks of struggling hadn't produced a single open door, because every door had him standing quietly behind it, holding it shut. I picked up the pen. I signed. But I made sure he saw my eyes when I did it. Clear, cold, unafraid. "You can buy my name, but you can't buy me," those eyes said. That's all. The ghost of something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Not quite surprised. Something in between. The Reyes estate was obscene. That's the only word for it. I had a bedroom suite bigger than any apartment I'd ever lived in. A closet full of clothes I didn't ask for. A car waiting in the driveway with a driver whose name I was told to use freely. I didn't use the car. I wore the same 3 outfits I'd packed from my old life, washing them by hand in the marble bathroom sink, hanging them over the towel rack to dry. His housekeeper, Marisol, watched me do this with an expression that went from confusion to something like awe. "Mr. Reyes brought in the stylist for you," she said carefully. "The wardrobe." "I know." I wrung out my blouse. "I'm fine." At the first dinner with his associates, men who wore their violence like cologne and smiled like they were always measuring you, I sat at the long table in my own faded jeans and a plain blouse. Dante sat at the head in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, and I watched his jaw tighten by exactly 1 degree when I walked in. I smiled at him sweetly and took my seat. The men tried to talk to me. I answered every question with exactly 3 words or fewer. Dante kept glancing at me from the head of the table, and I could feel him trying to solve me, trying to find the formula that would make me perform the role he'd hired for. There was no such formula. After the guests left, he found me in the hallway. "You did that deliberately," he said. "Did what?" "The clothes. The silence. I wore what I own. I spoke when I had something to say." I met his eyes. What did I do wrong? He stared at me for a long moment. A muscle moved in his jaw. Then he turned and walked away without answering. That was the first time I understood that silence was my best weapon in his world. A month in, I found the kitchen at 5 a.m. I couldn't sleep, I never slept well anymore, and I wanted tea. Marisol didn't arrive until 7. I figured I'd manage on my own. I didn't expect Dante to be standing at the stove. He was in a plain white shirt, no jacket, sleeves pushed up. He was holding a pan awkwardly, staring at eggs as though they had personally offended him. He hadn't heard me come in. I watched him for a moment. This man, the one people crossed entire cities to avoid, was battling a breakfast egg with the focused intensity of someone defusing a bomb. "Turn down the heat," I said. He turned around sharply. Something crossed his face, irritation, then something harder to name. "The heat," I said again. "It's too high. The whites will burn before the yolk sets." He turned back to the pan. Lowered the heat. Didn't say thank you. Didn't say anything. I made my tea. He made his eggs badly, but finished. We stood in the kitchen not looking at each other, and the silence between us was different from the cold silences at dinner. This one had texture. "Wait. You cook," he finally said. "Enough to survive." "And before the store, what were you studying?" I looked at him. He was staring at his plate. "Social work," I said. 2 semesters left when I had to stop." "Why did you stop?" "Money." The word landed between us with all its old bitterness. He said nothing. He finished his eggs. He left. But the next morning, when I came to the kitchen at 5 again, there was a box on the counter. Inside were enrollment forms for the university. The tuition, all of it, already paid. My name was already in the system. No note. No explanation. I stood there staring at it for a long time. Then I signed the forms. Not because it was forgiveness, but because my education had never been about him, and I refused to let his guilt steal it from me the same way his vengeance had tried to. I noticed him watching me. He tried to hide it. Dante Reyes was not a man built for vulnerability, but I'd spent years reading customers at a register, reading the shape of people's attention, and his attention had a particular weight to it. He watched me when I sat in the garden reading. When I talked with Marisol in the kitchen, laughing at something small and ordinary. When I came home from my afternoon university classes with my bag over one shoulder and ink on my fingers. One evening, I looked up from my book and caught him standing in the doorway of the sitting room, just watching. He didn't move away quickly enough. "Dante." I used his name deliberately, not Mr. Reyes, not Sir. His name. I watched that land. If you have something to say, say it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he came in and sat across from me, not close, not casual. Like he was taking a business meeting. "The organization has a problem," he said. "I'm not involved in your organization. I'm not asking for involvement. He stopped. His jaw worked. "I'm talking. That's all." I lowered my book. He talked. About a rival faction moving into territory. About the political complications, the risk calculations, and the decisions that had no clean answer. He didn't ask for my opinion. He just talked, slowly at first, then more steadily, like he was releasing pressure from a pipe that had been sealed too long. When he finished, I said, "Have you eaten?" He blinked. "What?" "It's past 9. Have you eaten?" "That's not. Yes or no?" A pause. "No." I got up and went to the kitchen. I made pasta, simple, quick, and brought 2 plates back. I set one in front of him and sat down with mine without ceremony. He stared at the plate. He picked up his fork. We ate in silence, and it was the most human either of us had been since this whole arrangement started. The attack came on a Friday night. I was in my room when I heard glass shatter somewhere in the east wing. Then shouting. Then, unmistakably, gunshots. Any other woman might have hidden under the bed. I opened my door. Dante's men were already moving through the corridors, controlled and fast. Dante himself appeared at the end of the hallway within seconds, gun in hand, and when he saw me standing in my doorway, he crossed the space between us in 3 strides. "Get back inside," he said. "What's happening?" "Someone made a very stupid decision tonight. Get inside and lock the door." I didn't move. "Is it the faction you told me about?" His eyes narrowed. "Valentina, I'm not discussing this right now. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking so I know what we're dealing with." He stared at me. We were close, too close, and the gun was still in his hand, and the sounds of shouting were still coming from somewhere below us, and I was aware of all of it, but I wasn't afraid. Not of the situation. What I was afraid of was the look on his face, which was not the controlled, cold face he showed the world. This was something raw, something urgent. "Yes," he said quietly. "Go inside." This time, I did. Later, much later, when everything was quiet, and his men had handled it, he came and knocked on my door. Not to check if I was afraid. I think to check if I was real. If I was still there. I opened the door. He looked at me for a long moment. "You weren't scared," he said. I told him. "I was scared for you." Something in his face broke slightly and reassembled. He nodded once. Walked away. I stood in the doorway and pressed my hand flat against my chest where my heart was doing something it had no business doing. 3 months in, I made a mistake. I'd been writing since I was 16, not a diary exactly, but somewhere to put the thoughts I couldn't say out loud. I'd left the journal on the kitchen table one morning and forgotten it. He read it. He told me later he'd only meant to move it, but the page it had fallen open to was the entry from my 3rd week sleeping in the car, and he'd read 3 lines before he could stop himself. And then he couldn't stop at all. I didn't know any of this until I came home and found him sitting in the kitchen with the journal closed in front of him and his hands flat on the table and his face doing something I had never seen on it before. Something that looked, terrifyingly, like grief. I stopped in the doorway. "You read it," I said. "I did." No excuse. No deflection. I walked to the table and picked it up. My hands were trembling slightly, and I hated that. Those are my thoughts. My private. I know. His voice was rough. I know what they are. Then why? Because I needed to understand. He finally looked up, and his dark eyes were stripped of everything. No armor, no calculation, no careful control. Just the man underneath all of it, and he looked like someone who had walked into a room expecting one thing and found something entirely different. "I needed to understand what I did to you. What it actually felt like from where you were standing." The silence stretched. "And now you understand," I said. "Yes." His jaw tightened. "And I don't know what to do with that." "Neither do I." We stood there in the kitchen, 2 people caught between what we'd been to each other and something neither of us had names for yet. The light was gold and late, falling sideways through the window. He looked older somehow. Less like the man who'd stood in my store and dropped money on the counter like it was a weapon. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what I did. Not the marriage, I'd offer that again. But for taking everything else. For making you sleep in your car." His voice went flat on those last words, like even saying them out loud disgusted him. I told myself it was strategy. Leverage. But reading your words, he stopped. It was cruelty. I was cruel. I had rehearsed this moment in my head. In my rehearsal, I said something sharp and final and walked away. Instead, I sat down. I said. It was cruel. Yes. And sorry doesn't undo it. No. He met my eyes. It doesn't. We sat in that truth together for a while. Not resolving it. Not wrapping it up neatly. Just sitting in it, The way hard things deserve to be sat in. I didn't forgive you, I told him clearly. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. I know. But I'm listening, I said. That's all I'm offering right now. He nodded. And for Dante Reyes, who had never needed anyone's listening in his life, I could see what it cost him to receive it. I didn't fall for him in one moment. That's not how it works for stubborn women. It was a collection of small things, spread out over weeks, that I tried very hard not to count. The way he left the kitchen light on when I came home late from evening classes. The books that kept appearing on the side table in the sitting room, not the ones I owned, but new ones I'd mentioned once in passing and never expected anyone to remember. The way he'd started asking me about my coursework, not making conversation, actually asking, actually listening to my answers with that focused intensity, he gave everything. The cooking. God, the cooking. He was terrible at it. But he kept trying, in the early mornings before Marisol arrived. Eggs, then toast, then once a spectacularly failed attempt at soup that somehow still tasted like effort and warmth. He never announced any of it. He just left plates. Like leaving food outside a door for a stray cat you're trying to coax inside. I tried to keep my walls up. I reminded myself what he'd done, replayed the car and the cold and the slamming doors of opportunity. I told myself that men like Dante Reyes didn't change, they just upgraded their tactics. But then there was the night I came home to find him asleep in the armchair in the sitting room with one of my textbooks open across his knee. He'd been reading it, my social work textbook, and he'd fallen asleep in the middle of it. I stood there looking at him for a long time. He looked younger when he was sleeping. Less like a man who'd built a criminal empire brick by brick, more like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally, for just this moment, put it down. I took the textbook gently from his knee. I draped the blanket from the couch over his shoulders. And then I stood there for another long moment that I have never fully been able to explain. Idiot, I whispered. Not sure if I meant him or me. He came to me in the garden one evening, 3.5 months in. I was sitting on the stone bench near the rose bushes, going through my notes. He sat beside me, which he'd started doing, just sitting, not requiring anything. I'd stopped minding it. The contract ends in 8.5 months, he said. I know. I want to renegotiate. I looked up. Renegotiate how? He was quiet for a moment, and I watched him, this powerful, feared, controlled man, working to find words that didn't come easily to him. Words that cost something. I want to start over, he finally said. Not to continue this. Start over. From the beginning. Not a contract. Not leverage. Me, asking you, if there's any version of this, of us, that you'd consider choosing. You think I'd choose you? My voice was careful, not cruel, just honest. No, he said. I think there's maybe a 10% chance. And I think you'd be right to say no. He met my eyes. But I want to earn the attempt. If you'll let me. I looked at him for a long time. I told you once that I don't forgive easily, I said. You did. I meant it. I know. And you still want to try? Yes. I thought about the kitchen light left on for me. The books. The terrible eggs. The textbook. The look on his face when he told me he was sorry and meant it in every uncomfortable, costly corner of the word. Then here's what you do, I said. You go legitimate. Not halfway. Not mostly. Fully. You build something your name can stand in front of in daylight. I've already started, he said quietly. I stared at him. Since when? Since a woman I owe a debt to is studying social work, and I realized I'd spent 15 years being exactly the kind of person she'd spend her career trying to undo. Something moved in my chest. I pushed it aside. There are conditions, I said. Name them. I finish my degree. On my schedule, my terms. Yes. I'm not a trophy. Not at dinners, not anywhere. You never were. Everyone in that room knew it. And if you ever, use your power against me the way you did before. I won't. His voice was absolute. I give you my word. And I understand if that means nothing to you yet. I'll spend however long it takes making it mean something. I looked at the roses for a moment. Then back at him. You get a chance, I said. One. Not because I've forgiven you. Not because I've forgotten what you did. But because I've been watching you try, and it's the most honest thing I've seen from you, and I think honesty deserves something. He didn't smile. He didn't make it triumphant. He just nodded, like a man receiving something precious and fragile and entirely aware of both qualities. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, I said. Earn it. What followed wasn't easy. I want to be clear about that. There were days I pulled back, needed space, needed to remember who I was without the weight of him in my orbit. He gave me those days without complaint. There were arguments, real ones, the kind that leave marks, about his old methods, about the shadows that still clung to his business transitions, about moments where I couldn't separate the man from what he'd done. I didn't make it easy for him. I wasn't built for easy. But Dante Reyes, it turned out, wasn't built for giving up. He kept showing up. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures designed to overwhelm me. He showed up the way consistent people do, quietly and repeatedly. Coffee the way I liked it, which I hadn't told him, and he must have paid attention to find out. Asking about my professors by name. Sitting with me through a study session for my hardest exam, reading silently in the same room just to be company. The organization restructured. It took time, and it cost him, allies, money, the fear that had been his primary currency for years. He let it cost him. He built the new thing in broad daylight, slow and difficult, and he let me see every step of it. There was an evening, 7 months in, when I found him in the garden after what I could tell had been a brutal day. He was sitting on my stone bench with his elbows on his knees and his head down, and he looked exactly like a man who had just paid a very high price for something he believed in. I sat beside him. Bad day? I asked. Martinez pulled his support, he said. Half the Eastern Alliance walked with him. We're exposed for the next 3 months minimum. Can you hold it? Yes. A pause. It's just expensive. I put my hand over his. Just that. Just the weight of it. He turned his hand over under mine and held it. We sat like that until it was dark. A year from the date I signed that contract, I was sitting in the kitchen at 5 a.m. again. Dante was at the stove. His eggs had gotten better. Genuinely, substantially better. He'd clearly been practicing in private, which was possibly the most Dante Reyes thing I had ever witnessed. Practicing eggs alone so he could present improvement as natural. You practiced, I said. I don't know what you're talking about. You absolutely practiced. He turned around with the pan and set a plate in front of me that was, I had to admit, nearly perfect. Then he leaned against the counter and looked at me with those dark eyes that had, over the course of a year, stopped feeling like an assessment and started feeling like home. The contract expired yesterday, he said. I know. You're free to go. I know that too. He was quiet. Not asking, because Dante Reyes had learned, slowly, painfully, genuinely, not to take what wasn't freely offered. I looked at the eggs. I looked at him. I thought about a supermarket and a slap and a car in the rain and journals and terrible soup and textbooks and garden benches and a year of being unmoved and then, slowly, deeply moved. I'm not going anywhere, I said. Something shifted in his face. Quiet and enormous at the same time. Not because you scared me into staying, I said carefully. Not because I have nowhere else to go. Because I chose this. I choose you. Which is a thing I need you to understand the difference of. I understand the difference, he said softly. Good. I picked up my fork. Then sit down and eat your eggs. He sat across from me and ate his eggs, and the morning light came through the kitchen window, gold and ordinary, and it was the most powerful thing I had ever felt, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real and it was mine and no one had forced it. I, Valentina Cruz, had walked into a cage, refused every bar of it, and somewhere in the refusing had built something the cage couldn't contain. That's not a love story about a woman softening a monster. It's about a woman who refused to be a pawn and, in refusing, gave a man his first real choice too. He chose differently. So did I. And that, I think, is what made it worth choosing.